I don't know why my hair does that all the time. It's like it's so weird. It curls. Hey guys, what's going on? This is Mark from Solar Games, and today we're going to talk about a viewer question that came in, kind of. So I usually like to do this. Sometimes right before bed, I will go scour my Discord or read a couple things before I hit the hay. And last night, a question that came from one of my Discord members. It's like kind of like a discussion they were asking more generally. I decided to kind of try to chime in and answer. Turned into a very interesting topic, which I think as an adult who is like 30 something, I'm an old man, old fart age era. I know that a lot of the younger folks who are coming into the market who are maybe a little bit new, fresh to collectability, investing, collectibles, just kind of haven't understood about how this market works. Now, one of the challenges and one of the reasons why this is so difficult because I do think that the TCG world, the collectability world, is pretty rife with scams and things. And unfortunately, that's just the way the market is. Now, part of this is like obviously the obvious scams like fakes and whatever, right? So it's literally not that card. Then there's the less obvious scams where it's about manipulating the market. It's about things like, hey, this is implied rarity, or oh, if you have a low population, those kind of things that makes different things more desirable or valuable, but it's kind of not really true. So before I dive too deep into that field, let me talk about what the question was, right? So the original question was this person asked me, I don't know if they want to be anonymous, so I'll just ask it more generally. If you're on the Discord, you can read the thread and you can kind of follow along. You'll know who it is. And if you're the person who asked the question, great. Now you get a longer form answer directly from me. Hopefully this is helpful. So the question was, if I have 600 bucks, basically, should I buy this serialized card? So I think, originally he posted the card. Hey, what do you guys think about this card? It's a serialized card, 13 out of 100. 13 is a fun number, right? Obviously. And it looks like the card is reasonable. I didn't even really look at the card because honestly, especially with serialized cards, it really doesn't matter what the card is. It kind of matters, but not that much, right? And then beyond that, it's really just, is it desirable? What is the purpose, right? And so basically, he posted the card, asked people's feedback, and looked at it. I'm like, wow, this is what I think about serialization in general. Yes, there are certain numbers that are highly desirable, 77, 88, 69, 420, 100, 1, 13, probably. What else? Like 9, 6, whatever. People, the numbers that people care about or think are funny, right? 18, 21. They're going to have different varying prices. So obviously those numbers are more desired than like, I don't know, some random number like 37, right? Less desired numbers. However, do you understand that like it is just a serialization like market? Does it really matter long term? What does it mean, right? And so this conversation turned from a here's a 13 doesn't matter to people into I want to buy this card because it costs $600. Now, right when that question came up, like should I buy this card? It costs 600 is when it triggered something in my head, which is like, why do people want to spend that much money on serialized card? So if you've been around the channel for a while, you kind of have an idea of my general perspective on serialized cards. That the implied rarity of the cards themselves doesn't really actually make the card rare. The number two problem is that, like, as Wizard of the Coast or whichever company that prints serialized card prints more and more and more of them, then what does that do for the cards that were printed before? And if there ever comes a time when they reprint a new serialized card with new art or whatever, right? New serialization colors, not gold, it's, I don't know, like rainbow or something. Does that make the previous version less rare? A good example would be like something like, let's say, Worm Coil Engine, right? So we know they printed the Worm Coil engines from Brothers War in the serialized format, 1 of 100. But then beyond that, like what happens in the future when they print, let's say, a master set, remaster set, double, triple, quadruple master set, where they print maybe another Worm Coil Engine, right? Because it's a very fun card, especially good for Commander that is also serialized, but with a different artwork. It's no longer retro foil, but like, I don't know, new age foil. Maybe it's like modern foil or whatever, right? Does that then devalue the previous set of Worm Coil engines? What if they make it instead of 1 out of 100 or 1 out of 500, they make it 1 out of 100? More rare, more like less population total. Does that make the previous Worm Coil engine less valuable? And this is the kind of problems that you have to kind of think through, right? So what am I really saying here? Implied rarity is not rarity. So this is something that I think a lot of younger kids don't understand. They think because they look at everyone else kind of pumping these things. obviously, if somebody's trying to sell you a serialized cards, they're going to tell you exactly why this thing's valuable, why it's desirable, why you should go buy this card, right? Otherwise, how can I make a sale? You're a terrible salesman if you cannot properly market your products, right? So, of course, they would tell you it's infinitely valuable. There's a lot of reasons why you should buy it. And sir, you're leaving money on the table if you don't give me $600 for this worm coil engine, right? Sounds great. Sounds wonderful. And you could look at the price history, the price data, everything checks out. Oh, look, it's this much money. Consistently, there are sales that other people are buying it. These are all good research points you can make. However, something that you cannot predict, and this is what happens in the future, is what is the company that basically prints these things will do with this card in the future, right? With serialized cards, yes, there is only a limited number of these cards that are printed per set. What's to prevent in the future more cards from being printed? What happens if every single card in Magic has a serialized version, right? Or multiple. Like cards like Soul Ring, as an example, you've already seen it, right? Within Lord of the Rings, there's already a bunch of serialized Soul Rings. You think cards like Soul Ring won't be serialized again in some other format? For example, Final Fantasy set is coming out this year, right? What if there's another Soul Ring in there? What if there's another, I don't know, like some sort of like IP crossover universes beyond where it totally makes sense to serialize another Soul Ring? Does that devalue the Soul Rings from Lord of the Rings? Look, I'm not saying yes or no. I just don't know. The other problem is it's implied rarity, right? Wizard of the Coast says it's rare because they are implying it's rare by printing one copy of it, etc., right? And saying things like, hey, this is never going to be reprinted in the same artwork, whatever. And then the problem is like behind the scenes with how Wizard of the Coast operates, right? They're very obfuscated with what they actually do, what their intents are. So the issue is, do you trust that they're going to hold true to that? Are they're never going to print a worm coil engine in a serialized format ever again? So yes, then if that's true, let's say you have a buyer 20 years from now who's looking for a worm coil engine but they really want this 69 worm, right? Then is the 69 out of 500 worm coil engine worth a lot more? What about the 666? I guess you can't have a 669 out of 500, but let's say like some other number, right? Would that be like 369? Would that be more valuable in the future? Probably, because again, it's the only copy you can acquire. But if there comes to a point where, like, hey, there's infinite copies of this stuff, and guess what? Like, I really want that other card. I really want, a specific artwork, specific version of the serialization, right? Does that devalue it? The other thing you'll notice too is like the serialized cards are rare because there's some stamp on the card. But for all normal players, they can access these, game pieces by just buying the cheaper version, right? By buying the more readily available version. So there's going to be normal versions of Worm Coil Engine, right? What I would argue is this: if Worm Coil Engine one day gets reprinted so much that it becomes, let's say, $1, $2 per card. Not saying that it can, right? I'm not saying that it's going to go there. So you need to sell all your inventory to me or anything like that yet. Probably should sell it to me. But what I'm saying is, if it gets to that point, what do you think the serialized version? Even if there's only one copy of it, right? Meaning there's only 500 Worm Coil engines that are serialized. There's no other serialization. But this Worm Coil engines on a general, the game piece version is only $1. What do you think that's going to do to the serialized price? And this is the factor that I really think a lot of people don't think about, right? And there's not an easy way to answer this question because desirability is very subjective. Different people will have different perspectives. You'll always have a buyer who will be willing to pay a ton of money, but the problem is that ever expanding set of inventory and denominator of serialized card can be like infinite effectively. So what happens? Right? There's tons of cards to choose from. Then your specific version is now less desirable. It's probably less. I mean, look, the money has to be divided in many, many ways, right? And if Wizard of the Coast keeps printing desirable pieces, like serialized cards, whatever, that money is not infinite. So as more collectors push their money generally to every single serialized card, well, there's less money to go into each individual serialized card. I don't know if that makes sense to you, right? And then what happens to the price? Well, there's less people who are going to go buy that card. So now the card has to naturally fall in price. And this is where even if you have a specific number, even if you have a specific card, serialized or whatnot, long term, if the company continues to print more of that card, I don't care what version it is, right? Then what happens to that card's value long term? It will still go down. And this is where it's a little tricky for people to really think through and think about, right? Um, Now, of course, like whenever I get to this point, people will tell me, like, what about like Grand Archive or some other card game where they do this kind of stuff? I can't really speak for other card games because I feel like this problem is everywhere. And even in Grand Archive, I think this problem is going to be prevalent. However, the one thing that's kind of interesting about Grand Archive is that the actual print numbers are, you know, like basically given to you. So for any specific serialized card or like even a collector's super rare, right, where it's not serialized, the creators do put a number next to how many of this card they're going to print in this format, right? So let's say the foil version of a certain card like Grand Crusader Ring in first edition, that's limited. There's not going to be any more Grand Crusader Rings in the foil version of the first edition, okay? However, that doesn't limit them from printing other versions that might be better, crazier, more promo, more, I don't know, fancier, right? So there's always that possibility in the future as well. So it's a little tricky, right? Of course, like first of everything, like I always think about is always going to have some sort of like nostalgic higher value because it was the first. However, long term, if you print the same artwork, and this is the key, if you print the same artwork effectively to anybody who picks up a card, card A and card A that was printed 10 years ago and card B that was printed yesterday, and they effectively look the same to some random person on the street, that's going to decrease the value of card A, right? This is 100% true. Like one of the greatest examples of this would be like something like Black Lotus, right? So if you look at a card like Black Lotus, Alpha, Beta, and Unlimited are the only places where Black Lotus were printed. And I would argue effectively, all three versions are different and they're drastically different from each other. So the card will hold price, for longer term, right? But if longer term, like they print more Magic 30 products where you have Black Lotuses that effectively look like, Beta Black Lotus on the front, then that will decrease the price of Beta Black Lotus. I know it doesn't exactly look like it. I'm just kind of using it as an example. Um, that will decrease the price of Beta Black Lotus long term if there's a lot of those cards being printed and readily available. That's the other key. If they only print like 10 of those, it's not going to do anything to the market. If they print 1,000 and say things like, we're going to print 1,000 more next year and every year after that, yeah, it's going to decrease the value of that other market for sure, right? So that's kind of how you should think about implied rarity versus actually rarity things, right? Now, let's talk about some of the other markets where there are rarity kind of built in, right? So one of the kind of interesting market is going to be the misprint market. Now, misprint market is actually rare because misprints are not intentional, right? So a good example is like back when I was collecting Pokemon cards, this has got to be like 2006 or so. Um, I remember there was an infamous like Diglett misprint where it's a Diglett card from the base set, but the fighting symbol was turned like 90 degrees, right? So basically it's a misprint. I actually don't know how that works. I guess somebody like on the artwork submitted artwork that was in the middle of being edited and they didn't finish editing it or something, and that's why it got to the printers this way. I don't know. It was only in a small batch, and only certain Diglett cards from a specific print run were this way, right? A Diglett card back then, 2006 or 7, when I was selling these cards, was about like what 49 cents, a dollar, or something like that. But the misprint one was worth 20 bucks. Now you can argue maybe I sold them too cheap or whatever. I did sell like I think a good like 8 or 9 copies of this misprint version back then. Now maybe a graded version today is worth, I don't know, $10,000. I don't know. I haven't really looked, but I'm sure it's gone up in price because again, those are actually rare. Now the misprint market also has its own downside. One of the issues with the misprint market is it's not for everyone. Like a lot of people are just going to look for the normal card. They don't actually want the misprint. Some misprints are kind of terrible looking where people don't want it. And you have to find the niche buyers who are willing to pay the money for those misprints, right? One of the other common misprints that are in Magic, especially in the early days, you'll have cards that are like cut wrong on the cut sheet. So you start like basically having the card cut in a way that like it starts showing the other card above, right? So the back of the card still says Magic, everything's good, but the front of the card, because the way that it was printed and cut later, it was actually showing like pieces of the card above it, below it, to the side, etc. These kind of misprints actually, are kind of valuable for the right collectors, and a lot of these collectors are looking for the full set, meaning they want the cards that came from the exact same like roller, so they can have this like general line that shows the miscut like getting worse and worse or better and better, etc. So that's the kind of stuff that there is a market. Now, it's a little tricky. Misprint markets liquidity is pretty low, meaning if you buy misprint for a certain amount of price, and the higher the price, it's always going to be true this way, but more so misprints, the higher the price, generally the harder it is to go and sell that card at a later point when you're ready to let go of it. So there is that problem in that market too. Now let's talk about grading market. So grading market, obviously graded cards, you know my opinion on this in general, but graded cards does have its implied rarity. Now, if you have a PSA 10, BGS, all quad 10s, black label, diamond certified, whatever, 10, then that card is going to be more rare because there's going to be less population of that card out there, right? The problem becomes, there's a little bit of a like market manipulation stuff that you have to watch out for. So if you're looking to kind of get into graded market and the like, especially high end grading, whereas you're getting 10s and perfects, you really have to think about whether the card is actually rare, meaning like it's really hard to grade a 10. For example, right? A good example of this, again, I'll use Black Lotus because it's a low pop and highly desirable. A graded Alpha Black Lotus that's graded 10. I don't think any 10s exist. Maybe there's some. I think there's a bunch of 9s. I don't think there's any 10s out there. But like if you ever get a graded 10 Alpha Black Lotus, it's worth a lot of money. Why? There's only like 1,000 and change alpha rares. Any rare, right, has that population in alpha of Magic. Now, out of all those cards, take any of the cards that are actually cut properly in a good shape 30 years from now, like 30 years from when it was printed, right? Still in a good shape to actually grade a 10 and maintain that since way back then when people didn't realize this is a card game that would last. They think it's just, like a thing. To have lasted all this time, that is incredible, right? That's not easy to find. And of course, that is actually true rarity. That's true. But then there are also markets where there are cards that nobody's grading, right? And if you grade a 10, you can have like a population of, I don't know, 8, right? There's only 8 10s here. But it's like for some weird, like esoteric common that no one would ever play. And it's just basically purely for collectability. Now, if you don't know that and you think it's actually, oh, it's low population markets, 8 out of, 1 of 8 population of this 10, you think you should pay a lot of money for it. That's where the actual scamming and the really like scummy stuff that comes in with graded market comes in. A lot of people out there are doing things like this because, again, it's just for them, it's easy money because there's a lot of people who are willing to shell out money for this. This is why I don't like grading from that perspective, right? Beyond the whole like, it's very subjective, and there's also sort of like, people give sweetheart deals to the people who grade a lot of cards, etc. All this stuff I don't really want to deal with. I like to grade my own cards. I look at the card. If it's good, it's good. If it's not good, it's not good. I don't really care about the rest of it. Let's talk about another market, right? The old school market. So this is the reserve list, or in like Pokemon, for example, Green Wing Charizard. You guys know about this, right? Shadowless Green Wing Charizards, or Red Cheek Pikachu, right? Things like this. Blue Eyes White Dragon from the original Yu-Gi-Oh sets. Black Lotus, Dual Lands, Tabernacle of Penarvale, reserve lists in general on Magic. These are what we call the old school market. This is where it gets a little interesting, right? If it's actually reserve lists from Magic's perspective, those cards are effectively rare. However, again, just like the first case that we talked about with the whole, printing serialized cards, it's implied rarity because at some point in the future, if Magic's in a downturn, Wizard of the Coast is desperate, Hasbro is super desperate, pushing for high profits, what's really to prevent Wizard of the Coast from printing Black Lotus again, printing the Alpha set again, right? Inserting those cards randomly in booster boxes to chase so everyone goes buys more products. What really prevents them from doing this? I'd argue really nothing, right? I know there's a lot of people who are like, oh, they don't have the right paper anymore. They don't have the right printer. They don't have the right ink. It won't smell the same. While I totally agree with you, but this is where it gets really tricky because we already have a problem in that market with fakes, right? And now look, a lot of people, we have ways, tools, etc., to go spot the fakes, but the fakes are getting better. We're going to get to a point probably where the fakes are as good as the reals. And then what happens, right? Effectively, this is the company printing their own fakes into the market. And a lot of people, and I don't mean 100%, I mean a lot of the people will not be able to tell the difference. And that dilutes the market. Suddenly, there's going to be not 1,100 Black Lotuses alpha. There's going to be 2,000, 4,000, 8,000, 10,000. And then what does that do to the market? So if you're putting money into reserve lists, I think it's safer because we do have history, right? So for 30 years, they have not done that. They have teetered on it. They've teased it. They've touched it. They've like stepped over the line briefly to then step back because they realize the impact of the market is huge. However, they haven't full blown just started, abandoning the reserve list and going back on their words at all. So to me, there is some security in the fact that Wizard of the Coast has not done this, that you can maybe safer put your money into older cards like this, right? And I can't really speak too much on the Yu-Gi-Oh side, but on the Pokemon side, it seems the same, right? Especially with Pokemon, one of the coolest things about the older cards is that they were done by Wizard of the Coast, not done by the Pokemon Company. Now, a lot of those cards that you can see visually are very different. And while it is still true that I'm sure the Pokemon Company can print cards like that, they're not interested in doing that right now at all because their new format is all this super shiny chase, full art, borderless, textless type of thing that they're going for. And that's working well for them. And the whole idea is that if something's working really well, you don't need to break it. You don't need to go back and print like, shadowless Charizards just so that you can break the market. At the same time, right? Wizard of the Coast, even when they were running the Pokemon Company, did have like reprints. I remember seeing some Charizards that look just like the base set Charizards, but they're not, right? And they're worth way less money because they're of a reprint set. So there's always challenges and things that you have to think about, right? Because again, your destiny is not your own because you're not the original creator. Someone else is printing these, and they own the printer, they own the ink, they own the capability to do it. And the only thing preventing them is maybe they're being distracted, they think everything's great, or they feel like obligated through some sort of like policy, like the reserve list. Promise, really. It's not even a policy. Another rare market that's kind of like a thing that some people put their money into is what we call the promos or other things rare market, right? So think about like judge promos, right? So judges often when they judge events, they'll get special promo cards that are exclusive artwork, exclusive text, framing, whatever for them. That's kind of fun. The problem with that, of course, is we've seen recently with Magic the Gathering, some of the judge promo cards are literally printed again, but now as secret layers. So anybody can go buy them for $30. I think that's a really terrible move by Wizard of the Coast. It really devalues the whole judge program and what the judges do to kind of earn those cards. And that's on Wizard of the Coast. But in general, that market is a thing that you can look into. Again, my fear is the people who control the cards can print more cards. So what happens? And then there's other fun stuff like the Illustrator Pikachu, right? So like old school, super rare, like for event only type of cards that are very unlikely to be reprinted again. Those are interesting. And I think there is, in some ways, that does feel more like reserve list to me than some of the other things that we've talked about, right? Or you have other things like the original like movie cards, right? So for example, this one, this Mew here from the original like Pokemon movie, right? I think this was the first movie. You got the Mew, the ancient Mew cards, and then you could like redeem it at the LGS or whatever. That was kind of fun, right? So these kind of cards, they will hold some value. I think I last checked, these are like $30 now. So after what 20 years or so, they haven't really moved up, too much in the market. They're just about the same as what they're not about the same. They're a little bit more obviously than what they were back then, but they're not much more. Even with the popularity of Pokemon, I would have expected these cards to go way up. But again, it's like these cards haven't been reprinted, right? But nobody's really buying it. And look how unique this card looks from every other, Pokemon card you've ever seen, right? And then of course there are signed cards where, it's artist signatures, whatever. Those are kind of a niche market too, because of course there's going to be people who are designing cards. Like Chris Rush, now that he's passed away, rest in peace, Chris Rush. Signed Black Lotuses by Chris Rush are obviously worth more. Now there's going to be authenticity issues that you have to deal with in that market too, and again, highly illiquid because there's going to be people who just don't want the signed version, no matter if it's Chris Rush or whoever, right? And then there's other like thick cards like the stamp stuff. So for example, like if you win events for a Grand Archive, you get these like nice little stamped promo cards from those events, or those kind of specific like stamped cards or those kind of things. I think those do have a market, but the problem again, it's the same thing. If the company has a lot of events, they run these events and lots more people get these stamped cards, it does overall degrade any one particular stamp card's value in the future, right? If the stamp cards obviously are super rare, they're like essentially serialized, then that's fine. I mean, like it holds the value long term. Again, it's one of those like it was the first event, so people were probably going to always pay a little bit more money for it. And of course, like Grand Archive in this aspect does something actually kind of cool. The rarest so far stamp cards from events are what they call spirits, but they're like named spirits, so they're kind of different. Normally, a spirit is just like it looks like a crystal with a fire around it, But these actual name spirits are anime girls in risque outfits, so it meets the requirements of that market. But it also has like serialization, so it meets the requirements of other markets where collectors are what the collectors care about. And the third part is because they're spirits, they're essentially equivalent to basic lands in Magic. It's a card that you would always play, so that you can always flex, to your opponents that you have this card. So it has also a player value. So my opinion on those kind of like stamped cards from events where you win like top 1 through 8 of Ascents and whatever, I think they do have quite a bit of value because again, it's one of those things where it's a card that people are going to want to play. They're going to really want to have this card. So that's kind of nice, right? So there's going to be inherent value for that long term. Now, if every event they give out more and more of these spirits, then what happens long term? Do people actually still desire them? I don't know, right? But that's up for debate for like a future topic, right? So at this point in the video, I do want to kind of share. I know I've given you basically my opinion on everything, but I want to tell you like what I collect personally. So personally, like I have, of course, some misprints, some of these old school promos, and these things. Some of these things I won in events. I'm not like going out there buying these stamped judge promos, whatever. Really, I mean, if they come in a collection, I'll buy it, but I'm not like going out there seeking specific cards from those sets. The only cards that I actually personally go out and seek are going to be reserve list cards, right? So for Magic, that's like those old cards that people like Black Lotus, Power 9, those kind of things I seek and pay money for. And for Grand Archive, I'll go buy the CSRs and CURs, collectors ultra rares and collectors super rare. Those kind of cards are something that I think are highly desirable. And there's a low chance of the same cards being reprinted in a way that would destroy the previous market, is my opinion on this. Now, I could be wrong, and Grand Archive is super new with very little history, so who knows what the future is. But from the intent of those cards, I do think that the general idea is that they're trying to build cards that are rare and that it's going to be overall good for the community and for the collectors who are kind of interested in holding these things long term. So that's kind of generally my perspective. So in a really long-winded way to answer this question is where should I spend the $600? Should I buy the serialized card? My answer is just this. I'm not a financial advisor. This is all for entertainment purpose only, of course, right? I don't want to get sued for this. But my general perspective and what I would do is this. I would buy the cards that make you happy. If it makes you happy to buy the serialized cards, please go buy it, right? But do buy it with the understanding that it's a card that has implied rarity. It's basically somebody else said it's rare, so it's rare. And then be okay with it, like maybe dipping in value. And I don't know what's going to happen with that card long term, let's say 10, 30, 40 years. And I do have like serialized cards too, right? So this one I pulled myself. It is Viserys here from the original like Secret Lair when I guess they were testing out serialized cards. But it's implied rarity, right? And so I don't know what's going to happen. Is it going to be valuable long term? Who knows? But don't buy the card thinking that you're going to flip it and make money in the short term. It's not going to happen. Really, that's not the point. If you want cards that are going to have a little bit less like volatility, meaning downside risk is lower, I recommend buying some reserve list cards. Buying cards that are actually rare, right? Whether it be maybe your market's misprints, maybe your market's more like artist signatures, maybe your market's more like these like stamp promos, whatever, from judge promos and whatnot. That to me are all way more interesting and way more reliable than to buy, for example, just a straight up serialized card that they printed yesterday. That's one man's opinion, mine only. I'm Mark from SolarGames. That's going to do it for me for this video. I hope this helps you with your buying decisions and maybe teach a little bit new things to newer collectors who don't really understand fully how this market kind of works. Mark from SolarGames. Stay classy. I'll see you next time in a video.